In our last deep dive, we really laid the groundwork, didn't we? We talked about the basic wiring of county government.
Yeah, the constitutional offices and those big gaps in oversight.
Exactly. Those deep, cavernous gaps that can make accountability feel less like a system and, I don't know, more like a hopeful accident.
That's a good way to put it.
And we established that, particularly in a place like Rutherford County, accountability has so often depended not on, some robust institutional infrastructure, but entirely on the willingness of individual citizens,
Just regular people.
just regular people to
Huh.
step up and demand it.
And that observation is so crucial because it reveals a fundamental weakness in the whole governance structure.
Yeah.
I mean, when a system is built, either intentionally or just by accident, with these loopholes that shield high-ranking officials,
Right.
or when the people in charge, the institutional actors, just don't have the will or maybe even the authority to enforce standards, then all that pressure, that immense pressure of accountability, it inevitably just falls onto the public.
It stops being routine governance.
It becomes a matter of civic heroism, which shouldn't be the case.
So if that's the built-in defense mechanism of the local system, then where does the actual check come from? I mean, where does the buck finally stop?
Well, that's what we're here for today.
We are undertaking a deep dive today into the case study that gives us the clearest possible answer to that question. The extraordinary saga of former Rutherford County Sheriff Robert Arnold.
And this is not just a history lesson.
No, not at all. This isn't just recounting some local history. It's a detailed blueprint. It's a blueprint for you to understand what happens when those institutional guardrails just fail. Spectacularly.
It's a dramatic story, a really multi-layered narrative. I mean, it involves a sheriff who was elected on this huge wave of popular support.
And then a 14-count federal indictment.
Right. And at the heart of it, a secret e-cigarette business that was operating exclusively inside his own jail. And then what came after?
An unprecedented, citizen-led ouster suit.
Unpre-
And this is where it gets really, really interesting for me. That citizen action led to a specific judicial rebuke. We have a judge, formally, in writing, scolding the district attorney for dereliction of duty.
Which almost never happens.
Almost never. And this is all followed by a federal prison sentence for the sheriff. And then, and this is maybe the most audacious part, his subsequent attempt to run for Congress after getting out of prison.
So the Arnold case, it really functions as both a warning and a roadmap for you, the listener. It's a profound warning about what happens when institutional failure is just left to fester.
And it's a roadmap.
It is an explicit roadmap showing exactly what mechanism, and we're going to get specific here, the Tennessee ouster statute exists for citizens to correct that failure when all the other layers of government just opt out or, actively refuse to do their jobs.
So our mission today is to analyze all the details of this story. We want to truly understand the systemic issues it exposed. We need to clearly delineate the two separate legal battles that were happening at the same time.
The state civil suit versus the federal criminal case. Very different things.
Very different, and it's crucial you understand that distinction. And finally, we want to arm you with the specific knowledge of how accountability, however imperfectly and frankly at what great human cost, was eventually enforced.
Right. Let's get into it.
We have to start with the vacuum. Because the structural problems, they weren't created by Robert Arnold.
No, he was a symptom.
He was a symptom. They just created the environment where someone like him could thrive. The central issue we keep running into in Rutherford County, and look, this is a situation that reflects many counties operating under current state law, is the absence of a truly functional, proactive mechanism to hold its own highest elected officials accountable.
Accountable for misconduct before they break federal law.
Right. Before the FBI has to show up.
It's a systemic void. And it's really critical to understand why these different entities fail to act. It wasn't just, one person being apathetic. It was a structural limitation combined with a deep political reluctance.
So let's break that down. Let's look at the specific entities that should have stopped this, or at least could have, long before the feds arrived.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the most obvious one, the most public-facing body. The County Commission. I mean, they are the county's legislative body. They hold the purse strings.
They do. And that's what most people think. They control the money, so they control everything. But the commission is actually severely limited when it comes to what we call constitutional officers.
And that's the sheriff, the assessor of property.
The register of deeds, yeah. These officials are elected county-wide. They are not hired by the commission, and that's the key distinction.
So they don't answer to the commission.
Not directly. Under Tennessee law, the commission's power over them is largely restricted to budgetary oversight. They can withhold funding for a new program, they can question expenses, but they cannot, under their own authority, fire or discipline the sheriff for misconduct.
Unless that misconduct is directly tied to the budget itself.
Exactly. Unless he's misusing funds they allocated in a very specific way. But for general corruption, for ethical breaches, they're basically powerless. And that institutional paralysis means they often just stand by, legally unable to impose any consequences, even when the misconduct is rampant and everyone knows about it.
So that's oversight body number one, essentially sidelined. What about the legal team that's supposed to be guiding them? The county attorney.
Okay, so the county attorney's office, their client is the county as a municipal corporation. Their role is advisory.
So they're meant to protect the county from lawsuits.
To protect the county from liability, yes. Not to function as an independent prosecutor against another elected county official. I mean, think about it. To go after an official like the sheriff could be seen as fracturing your own client, the county government itself.
It's a massive conflict of interest.
It creates this inherent institutional reluctance to take any kind of adversarial action. It pushes the county attorney toward providing cover, or maybe just looking the other way, rather than instigating a process to remove someone from office.
Okay, so the commission is hamstrung, the county attorney is conflicted. That brings us to the most obvious candidate for leading a misconduct investigation. The district attorney.
The DA, the chief local prosecutor. And they certainly have the legal authority to investigate. There's no question about that. But the DAs are often deeply embedded in the exact same local political ecosystem as the officials they're supposed to be investigating.
They're on the same ballot.
They're on the same ballot. They share political allies. They often share the same campaign donors. And that political proximity leads to, well, inherent, perceived, and often very real conflicts of interest.
So investigating a political colleague, especially a powerful one like a sheriff, is just.
It can be political suicide.
Yeah.
And that leads to a profound institutional reluctance to act unless the evidence is just overwhelming and, frankly, usually provided by an outside agency.
An agency like the FBI.
Exactly.
This internal friction is just. It's profound. Yeah. But we also have another body, one that sounds good on paper, the Ethics Committee.
It sounds great on paper,
Mm.
but they so often operate without any real teeth.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, ethics committees in many county structures like this, they lack real subpoena power. They can't force someone to testify. They don't have independent funding or a professional investigative staff.
So they're just advisory.
They become advisory bodies that, they issue warnings or they suggest policy changes, but they can't compel testimony. They can't impose serious punitive measures that would actually stick in court. Without enforcement authority, they're really just symbolic.
A symbol of accountability, not actual accountability.
Precisely.
And so that just leaves, I guess, state-level oversight.
And state oversight bodies, like the state controller's office, they are almost exclusively reactive. They are not proactive.
They come in after the disaster.
They come in after the massive financial audit failure, after the federal indictment, after all the damage has been done. They're designed to document the catastrophe, not to prevent it. They are not a local accountability mechanism.
So when you line all that up, we have a complete and total vacuum. And this absence of checks and balances, it doesn't just mean that corruption can happen. It seems to me it means a dangerous culture is actively fostered. What does that culture actually look like on the ground for, say, an average county employee or a citizen?
It's a culture of tolerated misconduct. It's a culture of institutional minimization, of quiet normalization.
What do you mean by minimization?
I mean, when officials at the highest level, like the sheriff, know that the entities meant to oversee them are either legally toothless or politically unwilling to act, misconduct becomes, well, expected. Minor ethical breaches get swept under the rug as misunderstandings.
Right, it's just a mistake.
A misunderstanding. And major abuses get minimized and downplayed until they reach a crisis level. And the Arnold case is the absolute textbook consequence of that culture. It demonstrates that the local system was entirely prepared to look the other way until federal law enforcement made it absolutely physically impossible to ignore anymore.
And the natural consequence of all that is just the erosion of public trust. I mean, if the people who are tasked with protecting the system and enforcing the laws won't do it, or structurally can't, why would the average person believe the system works at all?
That's the most critical implication of this whole structural failure. It breeds cynicism. It reinforces the idea that the system is built primarily to protect insiders, not the public.
Yeah.
And when the public finally realizes that the only way to remove a corrupt official requires an external federal investigation or, as we're about to detail, a massive, unfunded, high-risk legal effort by 10 private citizens.
Just shouts one message.
It shouts one
Yeah.
message.
Hmm.
Local accountability is a myth. The Arnold scandal wasn't just about a corrupt sheriff. It was about all the institutional systems around him failing or choosing not to intervene.
So if the system is that adept at protecting itself, you have to conclude that the only real check is external pressure.
Yeah.
And in this case, as you said, that pressure came in two forms.
Mm-hmm.
Federal investigators
Mhm.
and then the citizens themselves.
Right.
Let's pivot to that first initial shockwave, the federal response to the corruption scheme itself,
A raid.
the raid. The beginning of the end for Sheriff Robert Arnold has a very specific, very memorable date, May 21, 2015. On that day, the quiet complacency of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office was just shattered.
Completely shattered when agents from the FBI and the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, conducted a joint raid.
And that coordinated action is highly significant, isn't it? It's not just one agency.
It's hugely significant. A simultaneous raid by two major investigative bodies, one federal and one state. It signals a few things. It signals that the allegations were substantial, that they likely involved multi-jurisdictional issues like wire fraud, and maybe most importantly, that the local system was viewed as compromised or just incapable of cleaning up its own house.
So it was an undeniable declaration.
It was a declaration that accountability was now being enforced from the outside, whether the local powers liked it or not.
And the source of this entire corruption scheme, the operation that triggered this massive federal response, was a small, almost unassuming business. It was called Jail Cigs.
Jail Cigs.
What exactly was this enterprise?
Well, on the surface, Jail Cigs was an e-cigarette company. But what made it illegal and what made it the centerpiece of the federal indictment was its highly illicit structure and its purpose.
It wasn't just a regular company.
Not at all. The sheriff, Robert Arnold, secretly co-owned this venture. And we know the key players involved from the indictment. It was Arnold himself, his uncle John Vanderveer, and the sheriff's office administrator, Joe Russell.
Okay, so you have the chief law enforcement officer of the county, his own top administrator, and a family member all running a hidden business together.
A secret partnership.
And where did they sell these e-cigarettes? I mean, was it online? In stores?
No, and this is the crucial part. The sales were conducted exclusively inside the Rutherford County Jail. Exclusively. This arrangement guaranteed them a captive market, a market that was isolated, completely regulated, and incredibly vulnerable. They were selling to the very inmates under the sheriff's direct care and custody.
They were selling goods to a population that had literally no choice but to purchase from the single vendor the jail allowed.
The vendor that the sheriff secretly owned.
This just raises such an important question about the severity of profiting off individuals who are under your custody. This wasn't some standard arm's-length business deal, was it?
No.
This was direct financial exploitation of the most vulnerable population the sheriff was legally responsible for protecting and overseeing.
The ethical and legal line that was crossed here is just staggering, host. I mean, when you are the chief law enforcement officer, you hold ultimate power over the incarcerated population. Your duties go beyond just security. They include their welfare, their basic care, to use that immense power. The power to deprive someone of their liberty. To secretly establish a business that profits directly from their spending, siphoning money from their meager commissary accounts. It transforms a public office into a private ATM.
That's what it is.
It fundamentally constitutes an abuse of public trust for private gain. There's no other way to frame it.
And the specific charges the federal government brought really reflect this betrayal of trust, don't they? The indictment included wire fraud, extortion, and critically honest services fraud. Can you just break that last one down for the listener? What does honest services fraud mean in this context?
Sure. Honest services fraud, it's codified under federal law, 18 U.S.C., Section 1346. It's a specific federal charge that's used when a public official comes up with a scheme to defraud the public of their right to that official's honest services.
So, in simple terms,
Arnold wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing the public's right to an honest, unconflicted sheriff. His secret ownership of Jail Cigs meant he was making official decisions, like allowing Jail Cigs to operate in the jail and keeping their operation a secret based on his personal, hidden financial gain, not the public good.
It's the betrayal of the oath of office itself.
That's exactly what the federal prosecutors targeted, that fundamental betrayal.
The source material we have is very, very clear on this point. It says, quote, "It was a scheme, not a misunderstanding or a mistake."
And that's critical.
The fact that they hid the business arrangement, that they operated it through this secret co-ownership, it just emphasizes the premeditated nature of the corruption.
Precisely. They knew that what they were doing, profiting off inmates, was unethical and illegal. That's why they went to such great lengths to conceal it. The secret operation, the exclusive contracting inside the jail environment, it all demonstrates willful exploitation.
And as we already established, this scheme was operating completely unchecked.
Completely. Because the local system, which was paralyzed by its structure and by its politics, was unwilling to check the sheriff. So the federal investigation became the essential external response to a vacuum created by years of local institutional inaction.
Yet, even with the threat of a federal indictment looming over everyone's head, the local agencies still refused to step up. They still refused to enforce the basic minimum required by state law.
They needed the citizens to show them the way.
And that's where the true drama of this whole saga really began.
It really is.
So while the federal machine was slowly, methodically grinding its way toward a trial, a process that can take years, something extraordinary and, as you said, unprecedented was happening on the local level.
Yeah, a small group of citizens, they just organized themselves because they were completely unwilling to accept the institutional shrug they were getting from their own local government leaders.
An institutional shrug, I like that.
That's what it was.
This is the definitive shift in the narrative. We move from systemic failure to proactive, organized civic duty. The emergence of this group, Tennesseans Against Corruption, or TAC. It's a powerful historical moment.
It is. It showcases that citizen determination can absolutely counteract institutional reluctance.
So let's talk about who these people were. You hear Tennesseans Against Corruption, and you might picture, a wealthy advocacy group or some political action committee.
Right, a well-funded patsy. But it was far from it. The sources are very clear that TAC was composed of 10 ordinary Tennesseans.
And that number 10 is important.
It's a statutory requirement for the specific action they eventually took. And they were teachers, students, professionals, retirees. They were explicitly not politicians, they were not insiders, and they were not bankrolled by major political donors.
So what was their motivation?
Their sole motivation was the profound recognition of corruption and a refusal to allow it to be ignored by the people who were paid to prevent it. It was the purest form of grassroots accountability you can imagine.
And they weren't just, holding signs and protesting. They executed a very precise legal and media strategy. But that came at a real cost, didn't it? What kind of challenges did this group of ordinary citizens have to overcome just to get this process started?
Well, first, they had to become experts in state law. They had to study these complex, kind of arcane areas of Tennessee jurisprudence just to figure out what was possible. Then they had to organize public opinion, maintain a disciplined media strategy, all while facing immense pressure.
And real-world retaliation.
Yes. Most significantly, they endured real-world political retaliation. The sources confirm they faced threats, they faced hacking attempts that were aimed at derailing their efforts, and just general political pressure for daring to use the legal system to challenge an incumbent official who was still wielding immense power in the county.
And that just highlights the personal risk involved, doesn't it? When citizens are forced to do the government's job for them.
It's a huge personal risk.
But in their deep dive into the state statutes, they discovered a truly powerful legal tool, something that bypasses that paralyzed county structure entirely.
Yes, the Tennessee Ouster Statute.
The Tennessee Ouster Statute.
The statute is basically the constitutional backstop. It's what you use when every other layer of government fails to uphold the public trust. It is the definitive legal mechanism that allows the populace to enforce accountability directly against an official who has fundamentally betrayed that trust.
It's an incredibly potent piece of state law.
Potent, but very rarely utilized.
So explain the scope of that power for our listener. Who exactly does this statute empower a group of 10 citizens to bypass?
It bypasses every single entity we just discussed in the first part of this deep dive, every entity that either failed or refused to act.
So it bypasses the county commission.
It bypasses the county commission, which lacks the authority to fire him. It bypasses the ethics committee, which lacks any enforcement power. And critically, it bypasses the district attorney who was, struggling with a very clear political conflict.
And the statute grants the legal standing to enforce accountability directly to who?
To 10 citizens, just 10. And this is not a petition drive. It is not symbolic. It is a full-fledged legal right to initiate the removal process in a court of law.
That is a staggering delegation of legal power to everyday individuals. And they wasted no time leveraging this discovery.
No, they didn't. Once they identified this mechanism as the roadmap for accountability, they acted decisively. On September 29, 2016, TAC formally filed the ouster suit against Sheriff Robert Arnold.
And that action, it seems to me, served two strategic purposes.
It did. First, it began the official legal process of removal under state civil law. And second, it provided this undeniable local citizen-led pressure right in the middle of the slower-moving federal criminal proceedings. It just highlighted the local failure to act for everyone to see.
The citizens had found the tool, they faced the personal risks, they organized, and they initiated the process. So now we get to see how the local government reacted when it was forced to confront its legal duties under the pressure of this citizen suit.
And its reaction is telling.
This next segment is where the entire theme of institutional failure just crystallizes into irrefutable legal fact. Because TAC, they did everything by the book. They followed the law to the letter.
They did. They filed the ouster suit, and then, as the state statute requires, they formally notified the district attorney and the county attorney and requested their assistance.
And this wasn't just a polite request, was it?
No, this was not a casual, hey, can you help us out? Under Tennessee Code Annotated, specifically the laws governing these ouster proceedings, both the DA's office and the county attorney's office are legally required to aid and assist the citizens bringing the action.
And the language is absolute. The law says must.
It is an explicit statutory obligation. It's not may, it's not can, it's not if they feel like it.
It's must.
It's must.
Arr.
It does not provide for discretion based on convenience or political calculation or even perceived conflicts of interest. The law mandates participation, specifically because the state recognizes the gravity of allowing a corrupt official to remain in office while their case proceeds.
So, given this crystal clear mandate, what was the immediate failure of the institutions? What happened next?
Despite this clear statutory obligation, both offices declined to participate. District Attorney Jennings Jones declined involvement, citing potential conflicts, and the county attorney's office declined as well.
They just walked away.
They functionally walked away from a legal duty that a group of citizens had spent their own time, their own money, and their own personal safety to activate. This institutional retreat just perfectly encapsulates the protectionism we discussed earlier.
Even when they were handed a fully formed, legally activated accountability tool on a silver platter.
The system chose to stand down.
And that inaction was so egregious that it provoked a judicial response, which, as you said earlier, is incredibly rare.
Very rare.
Davidson County Chancellor William Young, who was presiding over the ouster case, issued what the sources described as a highly unusual and a stinging written rebuke. What is the significance of a judge doing something like that?
Well, a chancellor, a judge of equity, does not typically issue a formal, written public correction of another powerful public official, like a district attorney, unless the breach of duty is undeniable and severe.
So this rebuke serves as proof.
It serves as judicial proof of institutional failure. This wasn't just a difference of opinion between lawyers. This was the court confirming that the chief law enforcement officer in the judicial process was derelict in their statutory duty.
Let's get into the specifics of that. What were the key findings of the chancellor regarding the DA's failure? Let's detail the legal maneuvering that the judge so strongly condemned.
Okay, so the chancellor confirmed two critical points about the DA's failure to comply with the legal mandate to aid and assist. First, he just reaffirmed the clear legal obligation of the DA to participate. He just stated the law. But second, and this is the most damning point,
Yes.
the court confirmed that the DA's preferred method of avoidance, just citing a conflict of interest, was not legally sufficient. He wasn't allowed to do that.
So if the DA felt he had a conflict, what was he legally required to do instead of just retreating from the case?
The chancellor explained it very clearly. If the district attorney truly believed he had a conflict, a perception that's often used, by the way, to avoid politically sensitive cases, he was legally required to seek the appointment of a district attorney pro tem.
A DA pro tem. What is that?
A pro tem is an impartial, outside, temporary prosecutor who is appointed by the court specifically to handle a controversial case impartially without any local political baggage.
So the DA had two legitimate choices under the law. He could assist TAC as required, Or he could request the court appoint an impartial outside prosecutor to do it.
Exactly.
And instead he chose an unauthorized third option,
Sure.
total refusal.
Total refusal. And as the chancellor made clear, refusing to participate was simply not a permissible choice under Tennessee law. The chancellor's written rebuke served as a definitive official legal finding that the DA's office, in this specific instance, failed its core duty to the citizens and to the state.
It's essentially the court stating, you cannot sit on the sidelines when citizens are doing the job you are mandated to do.
That's it in a nutshell. And this lack of institutional courage and duty meant that TAC and their private legal team, they had to perform the function of the state's chief prosecutor, using private resources to conduct government work.
But the citizens, armed with the law and driven by this determination, they didn't stop because of this institutional obstruction. They pressed on, and in doing so, they set an unprecedented legal precedent.
A huge one.
So, despite the obstruction, despite the DA and the county attorney walking away from their duties, TAC's legal team achieved what has to be viewed as a landmark victory in the state civil action against Arnold.
They secured the temporary removal of Sheriff Arnold from office pending the outcome of his federal criminal trial.
And this was an unprecedented action in the history of Tennessee.
Completely unprecedented. And the significance of this temporary removal cannot be overstated. It fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of the federal prosecution that was happening at the same time.
Okay, let's break that down. Why was temporary removal such a game changer? What did it prevent Arnold from doing during that critical negotiation phase with the federal prosecutors?
It stripped him entirely of his political leverage. Typically, when a high-profile official faces a serious federal indictment, they negotiate a plea deal. And that plea deal often involves a guaranteed resignation in exchange for a lighter sentence or fewer charges.
It's a bargaining chip. I'll resign if you give me a better deal.
It's a huge bargaining chip. It allows the official to save some face, often maintain their health benefits or their pension, and it prevents the most damaging details from becoming public at a trial. But by achieving his temporary removal, TAC eliminated Arnold's ability to negotiate his resignation.
He had nothing left to bargain with.
He was already out of office. It forced him to face the federal charges directly without the political safety net of what people call a cushy plea deal.
And that shift in leverage meant the former sheriff really had no option left but to plead guilty.
His back was against the wall.
Let's detail the outcome of that federal case, the one running parallel to the citizen-led state civil case.
In January 2017, Robert Arnold pled guilty in federal court to 3 very serious charges: wire fraud, honest services fraud, that betrayal of public trust we talked about, and extortion, all of it stemming from the jail sig scheme.
And what was the consequence for those actions? What was the sentence?
He was sentenced to 50 months in federal prison. And it's worth noting where he served his time. It was at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama.
So not a minimum security facility.
No, a significant federal facility, which really emphasizes the seriousness with which the federal government views public corruption. He was eventually released in 2025 to a halfway house in Nashville.
Maxwell Air Force Base. That detail, it underlines that this was seen as a crime against the federal system of governance, not just some local transgression.
It absolutely does.
Now, let's talk about the aftermath, because this is where the audacity of the institutional failure becomes apparent all over again. After serving his time, he made 2 separate attempts to secure a presidential pardon. And his argument was that federal prosecutors went too far.
That narrative, the idea that the process was excessive or unfair, it's a very predictable strategy of deflection. But it completely ignores the factual and legal findings of the court. It ignores the specifics of the charges he himself pled guilty to.
And it ignores the utter failure of his own local institutional systems to intervene in the first place.
Exactly. The pardon requests suggest a profound lack of acceptance of responsibility for the abuse of public trust that he committed.
And then comes the truly shocking announcement, the one that connects this history directly to the present political environment. In October 2025, a federally convicted former official, a man who pled guilty to using his public office to exploit inmates for personal financial gain,
Announces he's running for Congress.
he announces he is running for United States Congress.
And this is the definitive critical question this entire deep dive has been building toward. How? How can a county that supposedly has functioning mechanisms of accountability produce a scenario where a federally convicted former official can immediately attempt to seek federal office?
The answer is tragically simple, isn't it?
It is. The local system failed utterly to impose any internal, lasting structural consequences. They left the system unreformed. They left the door wide open for political rehabilitation and the continued cycle of institutional reluctance.
The system failed. The citizens succeeded. They succeeded in enforcing his removal and his criminal punishment. And that hard-won success, that citizen-drawn roadmap, is what now provides the essential leverage for any current reform efforts.
That's the key takeaway.
This is the part that makes this deep dive relevant to you listening right now. The Robert Arnold case is not just a piece of local history. It is a clear, detailed example of a continuing pattern in Rutherford County governance.
It is. The underlying structural flaw we identified at the very beginning, that institutional reluctance, is still fundamentally present and operating today.
So what the Arnold scandal did was it basically illuminated the institutional DNA of resistance within the county government.
Exactly. It's a recurring pattern, and it's defined by a few key things: selective enforcement, active political protection of those in power, and a culture that tolerates misconduct until it becomes a public scandal that is simply too loud and too embarrassing to ignore.
And that playbook hasn't changed since 2015.
Not at all. It's the unwillingness to enforce standards across the board. It's the idea that some officials are just too big to fail or, too powerful to investigate. If we connect this pattern to current and recent ethics issues in the county, we see the exact same dynamics playing out.
Don't we? The structural paralysis that shielded Arnold is still shielding others.
Absolutely. We see this pattern in subsequent ethics failures, where complaints are investigated, but timidly or not at all, because the ethics committee still lacks the necessary power, or the political will is just absent. We see it in persistent conflicts of interest that are just allowed to continue because no one with sufficient non-conflicted authority is willing to step in and stop it.
We have specific examples that reinforce this continuity, this pattern. What about the incident that was widely dubbed the Candy Crush fiasco by the local press?
Okay, take that incident. While it was a much, much smaller in scale than federal extortion and fraud, it fits the pattern of tolerated misconduct perfectly.
How so?
Well, it involved allegations of an elected official engaging in clear ethical misconduct, misusing county time, resources, that sort of thing. And the response from the oversight bodies was characterized by lengthy deliberation, minimal accountability, and a conclusion that essentially minimized the breach of trust.
So the response itself reinforces the culture.
It reinforces the exact same culture that told Sheriff Arnold years before that his misconduct would most likely be ignored locally.
And what about the core structural issues, the ones related to the constitutional officers themselves?
That persistent lack of real oversight for constitutional officers remains the central vulnerability of the whole system. These countywide officials, the sheriff, the assessor, the register, they often operate independently of the county commission's direct managerial control.
And this structural independence is exploited.
It's exploited to cultivate a culture of political protectionism where the commission, citing these legal constraints, can claim an inability to act decisively on conduct or ethics violations even when they want to.
And what does that say about the legislative side of the House, the county commission's own efforts to reform this? Have they tried to give themselves more power?
Well, what we have seen is a noted, consistent refusal by the Commission to update the existing ethics laws in a way that would give them genuine enforcement power and make the Ethics Committee truly independent.
And you have to ask why.
You have to ask why. Why would you update the laws if the current ones allow for maximum flexibility, minimal exposure, and minimal risk to the political establishment? It confirms that the system is resistant to self-correction.
Which is precisely what the Chancellor's rebuke confirmed back in 2017.
Exactly.
So the critical synthesis here, the big takeaway, is that the Arnold case provided the severe, undeniable evidence, the judicial proof, that the system will not fix itself.
It will not. And the only force that successfully pushed for accountability and forced the issue was the organized, determined action of private citizens.
And that realization is the necessary leverage for any current reform efforts. You cannot argue against the severity of the Arnold case. You can't argue against the judicial rebuke from the Chancellor. The citizens' actions provide the blueprint and the moral authority that's required to demand the necessary changes to the county's laws right now.
It's the foundation for any argument for reform.
The Arnold case provided us with the necessary warning. The work of Tennesseans Against Corruption gave us the roadmap. So now, the path forward requires public engagement and, frankly, some institutional courage to finally close these loopholes.
The focus has to be on modernization. The exact laws that allowed Sheriff Arnold to operate with impunity and the institutional reluctance that shielded him until the federal government stepped in are still largely intact today. To break the pattern we've spent this time demonstrating, we have to change the structure.
We know what the plan is. We know it involves presenting a direct, legally sound challenge to the county commission. So what are the core components of that plan to modernize accountability?
Okay, the plan has to focus on closing the loopholes that the Arnold case so perfectly exploited. First, it means modernizing the ethics laws to give them real teeth.
Independent investigative authority.
Yes, and the capacity to impose meaningful sanctions, not just warnings. Second, it requires restoring genuine accountability by creating an enforcement mechanism that doesn't rely solely on the politically conflicted DA's office or the county attorney.
And we have to specifically address that loophole regarding constitutional officers, the one that's so often cited as the reason for inaction.
Absolutely. The state legislature, through statute, must give counties the specific, explicit authority needed to hold constitutional officers, those independently elected officials, to the exact same ethical conduct and performance standards as every other single county employee.
So no more special treatment.
No more special treatment. This removes the political shield and ensures equitable enforcement of standards. This is how you finally end the culture of selective enforcement and insider protection that has persisted for decades.
And this calls for specific, coordinated action from every level of governance and from the citizenry. Citizens need to speak out, putting direct pressure on their local representatives.
The county commissioners have to find the political courage to support resolutions that call on the state legislature to grant counties this necessary authority. This is basically a home rule for ethics.
And the state legislators, who hold the ultimate power to modernize Tennessee law, they must be willing to step in and fix the outdated framework that currently enables this whole cycle of corruption and avoidance.
This is not just some local squabble. It's a statewide issue concerning the fundamental integrity of local governance. The Arnold case shows the consequence of just kicking the can down the road.
So what does this all mean for the person listening to this right now? What is the final provocative thought that you should carry forward from this deep dive into institutional failure and citizen action?
I think it's this. If the Robert Arnold case taught us anything, it is that when institutions fail, and the chancellor's explicit rebuke provides irrefutable proof that they failed, citizens rise. They rise up using the specific legal tools granted to them. And when citizens rise using that legal power, institutions are eventually, sometimes kicking and screaming, forced to follow.
And the knowledge of that specific legal tool is key.
The knowledge of the Tennessee ouster statute is not merely an interesting footnote in state law. It is the ultimate non-political check against corruption, and it rests directly and legally in the hands of you and 9 of your fellow private citizens.
The knowledge of that statute, the text of the chancellor's rebuke, and the courage displayed by Tennesseans against corruption is the key to building a county where accountability is expected, not optional. Demand that your elected officials fix the system that required 10 ordinary citizens to risk everything to do their jobs for them. It is the ultimate power of the people.
Use that knowledge wisely.